Hello everyone. I'd like to talk about this book today, 365 Days to Alaska. It's written by Kathy Carr, and the main character is an 11-year-old girl named Rigel. She lives in Alaska with her mother and father and two sisters. She has an older sister named Willow and a younger sister named Izzy, and they live with their parents in the Alaskan bush. That means, as you know, that they hunt and fish for all of their own food. They don't live too near a city or even a town. They live in a log cabin. They're pretty remote and they're all alone. I mean, they have friends that they have to travel to town to see, but mostly they are self-sufficient from the land. Rigel loves living in Alaska. She loves nature, she loves animals, and the book opens with, unfortunately, her parents deciding that they are going to get a divorce. And the three girls are going to go with their mother back to the town in Connecticut that their mother grew up in, back to the same home that she was raised in, and they're going to live with their grandmother. So before Rigel and her sisters and her mom leave Alaska to go to Connecticut, she sort of makes a secret pact with her father. And her father tells her that if she stays in Connecticut for a year, 365 days, he will figure out a way to get her back to Alaska. So she goes to Connecticut. She's not really doing too well. She's not adapting very well. She misses her dad terribly. She misses Alaska. And as I said before, she loves nature and she's finding it hard. She doesn't think that Connecticut has enough nature for her to explore. So she's not doing so great. Okay, she goes to the middle school, and one of the plot lines is where she is in the back of the school and she sees a crow. And she, the crow is foraging food in a dumpster, and she decides to begin to feed it. Now, she knows, being a girl that comes from the Alaskan bush, that it's not a good idea to feed wild animals because they become dependent on human beings. So her decision to feed this crow in the long run turns out to be a very bad one, which you will figure out if you read the rest of the book. So basically, this young girl, she's 11 years old, she has to try to figure out if she's going to make a life for herself in Connecticut or get herself back to Alaska, with her dad's help, maybe without his help. So I thought this story was very well written. It has a great plot. It moves along at a very fast pace. It's easy to read, and honestly, you care about these main characters, which helps. If you like books about the natural world, especially relationships between human beings and wild animals, like I'm thinking of Packs by Sarah Pennypacker, or is that her right name? Yes. Or Saving Winslow by Sharon Creech, or even some of the spirit animal books, I think you will enjoy this. So let's go ahead, as we always do, and read the first chapter. And if you want to continue, come in and get it, or put it on reserve, or at least put it on your books to read list. Okay, 365 Days to Alaska. Chapter 1. It's only 9 pages. I'll be quick. Rigel put the tip of the hunting knife into the hare's belly and made a careful slit. Once there was a hole in the fur, she could work her fingers in and pull the pelt right off, like turning a glove inside out. Then it was time to lay the pelt over a nearby branch and finish field dressing the hare. A raven landed in a nearby spruce tree with a heavy flap. It studied Rigel. its head to one side, then hopped to a lower branch for a better look. It was probably waiting for her to finish gutting the hair and throw its goodies into the scrub. Rigel would bet it had seen hunters do that before. It might have seen her doing it before. Ravens remembered things. "Hello," Rigel said to it. The raven riffled its feathers. It offered her a croak, not a loud, long croak, a shorter ah, ah. Rigel always spoke to ravens. It would have seemed rude not to. They were so smart. The cleaned hair and its rolled up skin went into Rigel's pack. She tossed the innards, head, and feet under the spruce where the raven sat. She squatted by the stream to clean the buck knife, then put it back into its sheath. She rinsed her hands quickly in the icy water, wiped them on her hoodie, and went back for the pack and gun. Then Rigel checked the safety on the .22 and put it over her arm in a cradle carry, the way her dad, Bear, had taught her. "Enjoy," she said to the raven before turning away. She'd noticed waitresses in restaurants said that when they put your food down. Not that Rigel ate in restaurants very often, but she was no hick. She'd been to Fairbanks. She headed home along the stream. Rigel was bringing home 2 hares, not bad for her first time out. 2 was enough for a meal for the 5 of them. She hoped her mother would make a casserole. Lila's rabbit casserole was the best. Bear always said that, even nowadays when he had almost nothing else nice to say about Lila. And Rigel had proven Bear was right when he argued last week that she was old enough to hunt on her own, that she had a good head on her shoulders. "She's 11 years old, he'd said. And Lila had answered, "You know, some people would say she's only 11. For a moment there, Rigel had been afraid they were going to start fighting on her birthday, but she shoved that memory away. The point was, she had gone out and taken her time and done everything exactly right, and now she was bringing home meat. If it had been winter, Rigel would have walked back to the cabin on the frozen stream, which was quicker, but breakup had come early this year, and now in mid-May, the ice was already gone. She walked along the trail at the top of the sandy bank instead. She got glimpses of their cabin through the trees and brush as she went along and started catching snatches of voices. Her sisters were outside. Izzy's voice came first. Izzy was only 5, and her high, bright voice carried easily. Willow's voice came later because it was soft and low. Rigel hoped her voice would sound that nice when she was 14. "Rye Bear!" Izzy threw down her jump rope and ran to her. "Did you get anything?" Rigel twitched her nose and munched with her mouth the way a hare would. "Rabbits!" Izzy shouted. "Rabbit, rabbit, 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 rabbit!" She bunny hopped beside Rigel all the way back to the cabin. "Hare, not rabbit," Lila would have said. She had a degree in biology and could be picky about that stuff. Hare, rabbit, it's the same thing. That's what Bear would have said. Rigel didn't correct Izzy. She swatted one of Izzy's sunshine yellow braids instead, and Izzy laughed and whirled away. Her real name was Iris, but that name only got used when she was in trouble. They had a good-sized cabin, 10 logs high, with 2 rooms. There was 1 window on each side of the front door, and the door and window trim were painted red. The red was pretty against the weathered brown logs, and there was a bench under each window where you could sit on nice days. The dried head of a northern pike was nailed to the cabin door, jaws spread open to show all of its long, sharp teeth. Wilfred Thompson, one of Bear's old hunting buddies from Fort McPhee, had put that up when the Harmon family moved out here. He told them not to take it down, and they never touched it. Willow was sitting on a bench with a stack of her magazines. She'd already read them all and torn out pictures for the collages she liked to make, but it seemed like she could always look through them just one more time. She turned a page. "You're my hero. I'm so sick of moose." They were all sick of moose by the end of winter. Moose soup, moose stew, moose pot pie, moose burger gravy on rice. Usually they would be getting more fresh meat and fish by this time. But everything was messed up in their house and had been since Christmas. Rigel wondered if she could go inside. She'd like to leave the hares for Lila and wash her hands with warm water and soap. She needed to clean the rifle, and she would have liked a little snack and a mug of tea. She was hungry after the long hours of walking, looking for hare tracks, kicking at scrub, and waiting for startled hares to pop out from under the brush. But the cabin door was closed. "Yeah," Willow said. She must have seen where Rigel was looking. Lila said to go play outside for a while, said she needed to talk to Bear. Rigel and her sisters called their parents by their first names. They always had. It was one of their father's notions. "Do you know what's going on?" Rigel asked. "No clue, but Lila got another SAT call this morning, so maybe it had something to do with that." Their satellite phone was supposed to be reserved for business or emergencies. Its minutes cost a lot, and it wasn't easy to charge either, given that they were off the grid and had no electricity. Until this past winter, Rigel had never seen her mom on the satellite phone for more than a minute or two, but lately Lila was taking it out into the cabin entryway where she could have some privacy and chatting on it for half an hour at a time. "I'm hungry," Rigel grumbled, throwing herself down on the bench. "I am too." Willow opened her magazine again. "Taylor rocks Snapchat," a headline shrieked in big pink letters. Who was Taylor, and what was Snapchat? Probably some TV show, Rigel guessed. If Willow were in a better mood, Rigel would have asked her, but she could tell by Willow's quick flipping of pages that she was nervous. And when Willow was nervous, she got cranky. Better leave her alone. Rigel rested her back against the cabin wall and closed her eyes. Rigel's folks had always fought now and then, but Rigel could remember when their arguments were about important things, like how many trap lines to run or whether to buy a second snow machine. She wasn't sure when those arguments had gotten hotter and more frequent. It happened gradually, the way a full tea kettle heats up until it's red hot and whistling furiously. By last fall, Bear and Lila were fighting about anything. They could argue for 2 hours about how many rows of carrots to plant in the garden. The last, biggest, and dumbest argument had been on Christmas Eve about whether to have blueberry pie or spice cake for Christmas dinner. Lila ended up making pie, and Bear made cake. The grown-ups did their baking without speaking, which wasn't easy in the cabin's tight quarters. On Christmas Day, they still weren't talking, and Rigel had made sure to have a slice of each dessert to avoid taking sides. A few days after Christmas was when Bear and Lila had sat the girls down and told them they'd decided a divorce was best for everyone, that things between them weren't going to get better. And a few overnight trips to Fairbanks was all it took. Rigel could hardly believe it was that simple, but there were the papers in Bear's old briefcase with the cardboard showing at its corners. Disillusion of marriage was written right across the top. Rigel hadn't minded much. That's what she told herself anyway. At least her parents wouldn't be shouting at each other anymore or going through one of those times when they weren't speaking at all, which was almost worse than the yelling. But the rest of the winter in their cabin was so strange. It was almost as bad as the days when Bear and Lila were arguing all the time. For one thing, there were the sleeping arrangements. In a 2-room cabin, there weren't a lot of options. The girls had the cabin's smaller room with its 1 window and 3 bunks. Bear and Lila slept in the main room, the bigger one. On one side was their big brass bed, the one Bear had ordered all the way from LL Bean in Maine and brought down from town in their skiff as a surprise for Lila. On that side of the cabin, too, was the old sofa covered with a balding caribou skin, shelves for tools and books and stuff, the pedal sewing machine, and the workbench. In the center of the room was the big table where Rigels Family ate and studied and did paperwork and played games. And then there was the kitchen area on the other wall with the shelves and cupboards, wood stove, and wringer washer. After Bear and Lila's divorce, Lila kept sleeping in the double bed, and Bear had to make other arrangements. He tried sleeping on the floor, but it just got too cold there during the winter nights, and the sofa was too small. So he took to spreading out his sleeping bag on the cabin table. Rigel, who was always up first in the morning, could never get used to seeing Bear snoring gently in the spot where they were going to be eating breakfast an hour later. All winter, her parents were distracted, not grouchy or snappy, distracted, like part of them was always somewhere else. They didn't plan the summer garden or talk about spring hunting or fishing or decide who was going to go away this year to do seasonal work and make some cash. Easter hadn't been much fun. There had been no Easter dinner or Easter egg hunt in the snow done with candy eggs, since they almost never had fresh ones. As for Rigel's birthday, Rigel suspected from the last-minute scramble that her parents had both almost forgotten. From somewhere close came the steady thump of Izzy's jump rope. Beside Rigel, Willow turned a page with a slithery rustle. Rigel shifted restlessly on the bench. At least she couldn't hear anyone yelling. That had to be a good thing. In some of Rigel's library books, the books that Lila borrowed for them through the mail, kids' parents got divorced. In most of those stories, the parents divided up the furniture and cars and bank accounts, and one of them rented an apartment or a house, and the kids' lives carried on like they had before, as far as Rigel could tell, except for the divorce. But Rigel and her family didn't live like the people in those books. They didn't have any cars or big bank accounts. Pretty much all they owned was this cabin on a creek off the Yukon River. They lived on what they could grow, hunt, and fish, and what they could afford to buy from the cash Bear and Lila scrounged up. Lots of people in the bush lived the way they did, without running water, without indoor plumbing, without electrical wires, without regular jobs, without neighbors. Bush rats, people called them. But that was going to be changing for either Bear or Lila, because one of them would have to move away. Maybe back to Fort McPhee, where Lila and Bear met and Willow and Rigel had lived when they were little. Maybe to Galena, maybe even Fairbanks. Would the girls move too, or would they be staying here? That was what Bear would call the $1,000,000 question, the one that was making Rigel lose sleep and poke listlessly at her food. Anytime she made herself think about it, her heart started beating faster and her hands started to sweat. The cabin door swung open. "Come on in, girls," Lila called. "Your father and I need to talk to you." That's 365 Days to Alaska. I think it's a great book for kids in grades 4 through 6. I hope you all have a nice weekend. Thank you.